When the earth is ravaged and animals are dying, a new tribe of people will come onto the earth from many colors, creeds, classes, and who by their action shall make the earth green again.
Learn or teach people the sacred ways, turn the sacred, how to talk to the trees, how to honor the plants.
G'day everybody, it's me, the Crystal Star Seed here, and welcome to my Alice in Wonderland vegetable garden. I like to pick a theme each year for my garden. Last year's theme was Japanese water garden, and maybe this one looks a bit more like a Japanese water garden, like those big rice paddy fields they have in Japan. Even if my garden theme of the year doesn't turn out exactly how I envisioned it, I think it is important to have a plan, a beautiful plan of how your annual garden is going to turn out every year. And of course I have perennials dotted through my annual garden so it looks good all year round. We're in summer now and there's a lot going on. This beautiful corn that Kath gave me, Anastasi rainbow sweet corn, I think. I don't know if I pronounced that right. There's so much happening. Climbing beans are all a go. I've planted successions of bush beans which are up. So many different varieties of basil. The go-to cola is finally taking off. It grows like a weed everywhere else in the world, but I've just got it going here. My rhubarb, first time growing it, don't know what I'm gonna do with it. And the finger pumpkins are finally coming through, or finger squash, I should say. And my chicken snuck in here and had a bit of fun, so there's a bit of dirt all over them. Been harvesting a lot of zucchinis, ones that I grew from seeds that I saved, which is cool. The yellow zucchinis are my favorites. I've been eating a lot of them, and still lots of pumpkins that are still starting. I am in the Alpine region, so I'm a bit behind a lot of Australia here, but it's all going, and a lot of deadheading, pruning and cleaning this time of year for me. As you can see, there's so much chop and drop that I've chopped off the herbs, one to keep them clean and two to stimulate fresh new growth. So most of my herb bushes go from looking like this to looking like this. Totally sparse, a lot removed, light able to shine right into the center of the plant, and no crossing branches. Very similar to pruning a fruit tree. So I just cut it all back this time of year. And why do I do that? Well, these herbs basically went dormant through the winter, and a lot of dust and fungal spores and germs and bacteria built up on the leaves, but those leaves were necessary to stimulate the new spring growth. And now that they're growing, these old leaves that are left behind, I've just chopped the top of this one back so you can see these old leaves. They're covered in different kinds of bacteria growth, dirt, and all these spores and unpleasant enzymes are then passing on fast to the new leaves. So I want to clear all that out so it looks like this. And don't worry, the plant will grow back with even more vigor. The new growth will be young and fresh and tender, and all these nasties growing in the undergrowth from those old leaves from last year seem to also drain the plant's energy, so that the new growth is struggling to push through this bacteria or fungal or mix of different infections of the old dying leaves. Even this African basil that is barely affected by this, if I go in and have a look, I can still see yellowing and a bit of stress and mildew building up on the leaves. So I'll cut this African basil back just like I've done to this one. And that's just going to stop any of that passing onto the fresh leaves, which I'm going to be harvesting. So I chop it all right back. Even the leaves that look good, it's all right. It's going to grow even faster and stronger now that it's not bearing the burden of all that infection. And also in nature, different animals and different insects, grasshoppers, would come and naturally remove those leaves, and the plant wouldn't have to carry them for so long. But in our guarded and protected vegetable gardens, there's not as much action, there's not as much critters and mammals eating and chomping away at our plants. And these plants have also been cultivated for thousands of years and are used to being stripped of all their leaves. Farmers, growers, gardeners have been doing this for thousands of years with these plants, and they've actually adapted to it and they like it, and there's a positive reaction that comes from it. And you can see down in here there's some crossing of some branches, so I'll just pull that off. So there's no new undergrowth. You can even run your fingers up and down the stem if it's strong enough, just breaking all those little new growth bits. And then all the new growth will be in the top, in the sunshine. We want the sunshine to get into the center of the plant because it washes and cleans the plant of any unwanted bacteria or fungus, and also the airflow keeps it really healthy and clean in there. And this top growth will get bigger and lusher and grow completely unaffected. And I'll show you what I mean by affected. These old sage bushes which are bearing the old leaves from spring, see how they're all a bit chewed away by bugs and a bit infected by this and that. So it's passing on faster to the newer, younger leaves, which I won't be harvesting. So leaves that usually wouldn't be affected are also suffering now, and they're not growing as big or as lush as they usually do. So I'm going to remove any stems that are crossing, and I'm going to clean every stem that's left behind. And while doing this, I'm also left over with a lot of beautiful cuttings that I can use for brand new plants. So I'll be taking a lot of cuttings as I clean. I can literally clone hundreds of new plants just from cleaning one plant. So So I'm really just getting in there and cleaning everything up. Any branches and leaves that are hanging low and touching the ground, building up with muck, and in these hot and wet days, building up fungus and bacteria. Also, when leaves and branches are touching, bugs and insects are more likely to stay there and make it their home, and they make a mess in the leaves, and then that affects the leaves and the growth of the leaves. There's a really beautiful blue moth that flew away. I also, when I'm doing this, remove any tops that are a bit, see, they're straying away from the usual leaf formation to make a flower. So I take special attention to remove at least an inch down, because that sprig, that little branch there, is full of flowering hormone, and I want the leaves and not the flowers. But if I wanted the flowers, I would leave that, of course. So I look for any leaves that are making a flower formation, and I remove them. Yeah, and that's how it looks in the end compared to that. And it can seem a bit drastic at this time of year, especially if you're new to growing herbs, but you'll find that the plant responds so well. And by really getting in here and cleaning all the new mangy growth off these nodes, will keep the light and airflow flowing through the center of your plant, feeding those new young leaves, and you'll get that new, fresh, vibrant growth again, like you did in spring, instead of the plant holding on to all these old, troublesome leaves. Or if you've been good and have been cleaning your plant as you go, as it grows, you may not need to do this at all, but I do grow a lot of herbs. And one of the reasons I love ground cover, creeping herbs like oregano and thyme, is because you can literally just cut them right back down to the ground. And I'm not going to do it for you right now. It's pretty self-explanatory, but this oregano, when I'm ready to eat it, I can just cut it back down to the ground. And those bottoms, those mangy bottoms with those old leaves that I don't eat, I can then plant those cuttings on, creating hundreds more. Oregano, African basil, tulsi, all different varieties of sage, multiplying them from the little scraps that are left behind in the kitchen when I'm preparing my dinner. For instance, I would pick myself some oregano and I would strip the leaves off the stem, and take the top off, and I would eat what's in my hand, and what's left behind is the stem and a bit of leaf matter. I would then proceed to plant that little bit that everyone throws away, plant that in there, water it in and keep it in the shade for a few weeks, and in summer they just grow so fast from clones. Oh, it smells so good. I really love oregano and I've decided to multiply. I know you can get it anywhere, but I still think it's one of those truly awesome, medicinal, yet everyday edible, gentle enough to eat everyday herbs that thrives in winter, especially for me and people like me in a temperate or alpine region of the world. Oregano is just amazing. Here's some older ones, a couple months older than the other ones. So I do this every time the moon's waning. I'll make myself an oregano, golden marjoram, basil, what have you for dinner, and then plant the little scrapling cuttings and use them for clones. I also do it when I'm pruning back my salt bush and African marigolds, all sorts of plants, anything that can grow easily from a cutting. The native pepper, some plants are happier to be taken from cuttings in winter, like the native pepper and white sage. You'll learn these little tricks and tips on the way. I do want to make a master outdoor cutting video at one stage though. Most of the cuttings, the clones that I'm taking at this time of year, and even the seeds I'm planting in summer, the new seeds, they're in preparation for next spring. So all of these that you see here can survive the alpine winter at the bottom of the mountains in Victoria, Australia. So by next spring, these pots will be full of roots and the plants will be more than ready to leave their pots straight after the last frost. So I start thinking about next year's crop during the height of summer. And it's a good idea to start thinking about that too, because you don't want to be scrambling around for plants, but nurseries do a great job of providing mature plants right at the start of every season. But if you are growing from your own seed, growing from your own cuttings, and you want to be just as ahead of the game, you might want to start thinking about taking clones now. And a lot of these, I'm just happy for them to root and to be living plants instead of just little sticks. And then I just keep them happy through the winter, get them through to the spring. And like I said, I have plants that are more than ready to leave their pots straight after the last frost. So now that I've cleaned up my herb bushes, the light can flush through and clean the plants. Now even birds can get in there and eat any little grubs or insects that they can, and my gorgeous predator insects like my ladybugs and other predators can see exactly what's going on in those bushes and do their jobs. And most of what I cut away, I just let fall to the ground at the base of the plant as a chop and drop. I find my areas dry enough that this breaks down and goes dry fast enough before it can build up any mildew that then passes back on to the living plant. But if your area is more damp, maybe tropical, you might want to put this chop and drop away from the plant that it came from. But like I said, I've never had a problem with the dying matter passing anything back onto the plant. And it also gives the worms and microbes and other little critters something to eat while shading the soil in the middle of summer, the hottest period. But like I said, there is some really great cuttings that can come from all this plant matter. I'm also deadheading this carpet flower bush, and you'll have to deadhead a lot of your flowers to keep them flowering. I've sacrificed a lot of beautiful looking flowers, but by doing this, the plant will keep on making more and more flowers because the seeds haven't formed yet. The plant hasn't got the chemical message from the seed that it can pass on the next generation. So I keep pulling off the flowers before it goes to seed. The plant thinks, well, I'm just going to make more and more flowers to make more and more seeds. So when I do finally harvest seeds from the carpet flower, I'll get a bigger crop of seeds, and my carpet flower plant will live longer, grow bigger, and I'll get more flowers. And this African basil is the last of the herbs. Oh no, I've got a few over there I need to clean up, but one of the last. So there's this, let's find a branch right in the center here, a nice young branch, a perfect cutting. So like I said, just as if I was eating it, just like when I'm pruning it back, I clean most of the leaves off, exposing the broken nodes where the new roots are going to come. I take any flower or budding head off because the plant will try and make seeds over making new roots, and because we want to clone it and start a new plant, we'll remove all that flowering hormone so the energy and chemical message goes to creating new roots. And we just leave a couple leaves on top for the plant to photosynthesize and to feed off, but not too many to stress the plant out because it hasn't got roots to feed from, so it can only feed from its leaves. So we leave just enough for it to eat. And we have a nice little sprig. I'll add it to this collection of beautiful holy basil tulsi sprigs I took from this plant here that's nicely pruned back. So you just end up with all this beautiful cutting material. And I grow a lot of perennial basils, but because I'm in a heavy frost alpine region, unless it has great protection over winter, and a lot of my customers saw their basil through to the winter. I didn't think anyone would, but almost everyone did. Everyone planted theirs under a tree like I do mine in winter, and theirs survived and came back. But because I grow all mine from clones or seeds, people come to me asking for tulsi plants at the start of spring, and I've only just put in the seeds or only just taken the cuttings if I'm lucky. So I'm going to take the cuttings now, and I want them just to survive, just to strike roots. I'm going to plant them all very close together in a tub, and these are for next spring. Trying to grow cuttings now and getting a decent crop or a decent plant off them is a bit of a stretch, but it's easy to get these annuals to take root because of the heat at this time of year in summer. So I'm going to strike these cuttings now so people can have established plants in spring. I'm going to put them all in here really close together, these great fresh succulent summer cuttings, and then separate them next spring, pot them on and sell them and give them away. Again, we're just trying to keep things clean, trying to keep things from touching, removing as many leaves as we can that are touching the soil beneath. I've actually put a layer of wood chips for a few reasons. One, because these are all going to be growing in here for months and months through the winter until next spring. So this is long-term soil coverage, evaporation protection, and also when I water these, it stops any splashback from building up on the leaves, which can be a bit of an annoying thing. When growing cuttings, you want those leaves to be clean and as fresh as possible, soaking in the sunlight, giving the plants their energy to grow roots. And if I'm in a good mood, I may even mix some honey with some water just a little bit and feed it to them because of the salicylic acid in the honey, which helps with root development. But to be honest, if a cutting's going to grow, it's going to grow. It's just nice to help the cutting along the way. You can also make willow bark tea, anything with salicylic acid, anything which helps with root development. But I wouldn't fertilize cuttings because they don't have the roots to soak it up and process the fertilizer before it hits the body of the plant. So they like the soil pretty clean. They just want to be able to absorb basically water. The leaves need to stay lush and hydrated, so I usually keep my cuttings in a pot or a tray of water, if not water them every day, especially this time of year in summer. And because these are planted so close together, of course, they're all going to be touching and choking each other out, so I'm just going to keep mowing this down if I have to, because what I really want is the root ball and just a living plant for the start of spring, because once these are separated and planted in their own pots, they'll just grow so fast. And for all those customers this year that wanted thriving plants at the start of spring, I'll be able to provide that next year. So even though I'm in an alpine region and Tulsi, holy basil, is perennial, it is an effort to see it through a temperate, seasonal, frosty region. So this is my new strategy for having healthy, large basil plants as fast as possible every spring. So other things that are happening in the garden this year, there are a lot of different highs and lows, and the lows aren't negative, they're just learning curves. I am adapting to this new region. I did grow up here, but I honed a lot of my gardening skills in a warmer, slightly warmer climate without frost. So, and also just this area of the world, the different insects and bugs. One of the things that is going well and not so well, my bean tunnel, which is coming along, growing in succession as I plant my beans and erect the bamboo. It's looking great, but it hasn't been producing so well. I don't know if it's because of the really beautiful hot days we've had here, if they're knocking the flowers off, or if I put too much nitrogen in the soil and the beans are saying we can just keep growing for as long as we want, because bean plants tend to throw off more bean pods when the soil's lacking, because they are legumes and they can suck in their own nitrogen through the air. So I hope I didn't put too much nitrogen in the soil, but the plants are still flowering and just getting bigger and bigger. So I'm hoping when they do decide to keep their beans, that because the plants are already so big, I do get a bumper harvest of beans. But there's heaps more time left, and if all else fails, there's the whole of autumn, and these beans are happy to go through autumn. So I can even just re-establish these beans by planting more back in here at the base of the old ones and removing these leaves as I do, the older they get. Again, a lot of pruning and cleaning, a lot of removing any old leaves. I'm leaving the leaves on here to shade the flowers in the hopes that it helps with bean production. But I've never had this issue with beans before, so it's always an adventure in the garden. I'm really happy with my chilies that I overwintered. I grew these from seeds from the first ones I grew that I originally brought. I think I brought the seeds from an Australian grower on eBay, purple ghost chilies. So I grew these seeds last year and planted them in the garden, and we had extreme bushfires here last year, and I put so much effort into them, and these plants put so much effort into them, but by the time the frost came, they were finally strong enough to make flowers and started dying back. And I thought, screw this, this has been 9 months of good solid work from me and this plant. So I dug my chilies that I grew from seed up and put them in pots and overwintered them inside, and they're doing extremely well. This is just the first batch and there's so many flowers. Look how nice that is after pruning back all those unnecessary leaves, allowing the light and airflow to keep the plant clean while also exposing all these ghost chilies to the sunlight, helping them to ripen, also exposing all the hidden flowers, allowing all the bees and different insects to get to them and pollinate them, so I can get the most out of my chili plant. So it really pays to keep it clean. And I've just been harvesting so much from these sage and basil plants. It's quite shocking to see them so bare, you can barely make them out in the image, but they have just been flourishing. It's only during this rain and sun few weeks that mildew built up, and I stopped harvesting, and now I've cleaned them back. The Angelica here has just gone strong all spring through the summer. It's the only thing I water. It's the only thing I need to water if I feel like watering something. If we don't have rain for a whole week, I'll just leave the tap dribbling underneath, because it does like to grow by creek beds and waterways. But I've been harvesting it and drying it. A great celery and parsley alternative this time of year when it's harder to grow celery and parsley. And like I said before, my finger pumpkins are just looking amazing. Or finger squash, I need to start calling them. It's because the seller I brought them off advertised them as finger pumpkins. So I've always just called them finger pumpkins, but they are technically a squash. In reality, they grow to the size of a small pumpkin, a decent size, and can develop quite a thick skin and can be stored quite easily for about 9 months. But they taste, actually, I reckon, more like a zucchini. Not much flavor at all, but really good to soak up the flavor of any sauces, curries, or spices. So there's a lot of cleaning and considering how you're going to go about things next year, starting to save seed, starting to make clones. These snake beans are coming along nicely. A lot of chop and drop, and then also shuffling the chop and drop around to make way for any new plants that are going into the ground. The beans that I planted at the base of the sunflower plants are now taking over the sunflower plants now that all the flowers are done. So you can plant one creeping plant at the base of a short-lived large annual plant like corn. You can plant beans or cucumbers, anything that needs something to climb on, a structure at the base of your corn, your sunflowers, your carrot tops. And I keep these carrot flowers flowering because they are so big and they are a really cool presence, and they attract so much insect life. They're usually covered in lady beetles, as I brought the camera over here to show before, but I don't know where the lady beetles are gone. But they just attract a whole host of activity. A lot of predator bugs call them to the garden, and then the bugs can then disperse and do their job. Maybe the bugs have gone over to the corn like they sometimes do, the ladybugs. But this Anastasi corn, I've been really blessed with people sending me and giving me so many awesome seeds this year. And I'm testing a lot of new varieties. It's looking still a little bit sparse, but that's okay because it's basically full. There's enough plants in here to take the space. I love this wild forest tulsi. It's going to flower here. I really would love some seeds. The wild forest variety, the leaves are velvety and soft, and I mix that into my tea mix. I also have a shiny leaf wild variety as well. And yeah, just a lot of different things all going on. I'm testing a lot of different things. The strawberries always go great in the alpine region, and I just pick strawberries every other day, which is great. And this new variety with a red flower is really fancy. And the oregano, thyme, all these new herbs. It's like sometimes we think these herbs like oregano and thyme are so common. Us new gardeners forget about them, but I've really had to remind myself they're great space fillers. They taste amazing and they look great through winter. So I'm really just trying to work with the plants that want to work with this region and this area. That's where my head's at, that's where I'm thinking. And also then seeing what native edible varieties can be introduced, or hopefully native varieties that are easier to grow, that I can replace some of the more finicky, time-consuming foreign varieties. And I made a ridiculous amount of green manure fertilizer in this 44-gallon drum, and I made so much, and it's really a lot of work. I'm more watering it down because my hose is so slow. It's connected to a well, which is great to have natural clean water, but watering it down over and over again in these buckets 10 to 1 takes up a couple of hours if I'm doing it properly. But my green manure 44-gallon drum sprung a leak, and it's all leaked out, and I've tipped it over and just getting the last of the nutrients I can to these pumpkins. I don't really mind because it was a bit overkill this year. I don't need it. I actually burnt a few plants, so I learned my lesson about really watering it down 10 to 1. These turmeric plants, you can see the yellowing of that leaf there. That was when I poured the fertilizer on. The new leaf is coming up, thank God, more green, but the turmeric didn't appreciate the fast nitrogen hit. Every other plant could seem to handle it though. And I seem to be hearing around and about, a lot of people are thinking, I've got my spring, early summer crop, it's too hot now, it's all over. But really, for me, it's just begun because my soil is covered in so much mulch, and there's so many long-lived annuals and perennials and self-seeding, and I'm planting in succession short-lived annuals. I'm just going to keep cropping on through to the end of winter, really. And then the garden hopefully will be replaced with a lot of brassicas and chard and silver beet and plants like that. So hopefully that will just, one season will just bleed into the next with a never-ending supply of food. So don't believe what you heard. Just put some mulch, some pea straw. I'm very extreme with my mulch, and that's another lesson I've learned this year, to peel it back a bit more about around young plants during spring, to let the soil heat up around those plants, because there was a bit of a lag with my vegetable plants because I had the mulch so thick up around the base. Now next year I'll give my plants more room to breathe and room for the light to hit the soil and warm those roots up, and then bring the mulch closer to the base of the plant at this time of year when they need the heavy protection. So my soil is so alive and active, and all these new patches that are being exposed and dug up as my successions of beans and basil are going in. The soil is so rich and dark, and I was so worried about this soil here. That's why I poured some green manure on it, and that's maybe why my beans are taking their time to fruit, because you shouldn't really fertilize your beans with nitrogen, they say. maybe that's a lesson learned. Well, I don't have any green manure left. I don't need it anyway. But as I prune back these leaves as they get older, and any juicy leaves, not so much the oily herb leaves, more the just leafy green matter, I'll start to put into tubs to make new green manure. So as I'm pruning back and cleaning the old leaves in the garden, like these yellowing zucchini leaves, if I don't chop them down and leave them around the plants as a chop and drop, this time of year, especially with zucchinis and cucumbers and pumpkins, I will take the leaves away so mildew doesn't spread. We can add some comfrey in here as a compost and green manure activator. Put that all in there. Any leaves that we don't want around the place, nice, fresh, juicy, especially weeds. Avoid them if they have seeds or too many flowers. So we'll just clean all this away here. These old leaves, these old sunflower leaves. Stop any mildew building up, and we can now start another green manure homemade fertilizer. And at this time of year, all this green matter in the warmth will break down into a nice, slimy green manure fertilizer really fast. And if I need some in a few weeks, I'll have some on hand. Now you can add some cow, horse, or chicken manure for those digestive enzymes to speed the process up even further, get those nutrients, those microorganisms multiplying, living, colonizing. So not only is your fertilizer highly nutritious, but also like a probiotic for your soil, introducing life forms that will condition and help your soil to further build fertility and to break down any mulch or organic matter that is in your soil, and help break down other elements like clay, bones, a lot of different things. Get those cycles living, thriving, growing, and yeah. So every year I feel like there's 100 things I could have done differently, but also some really amazing things that I got right that I wish I would have done years ago. So I'm still learning, and don't let any mistakes or failures put you off, because it just helps you learn and learn and learn. The more experience, the better. And like I said at the beginning of the video, it's really good to have a sort of dream version of your garden in mind. I like to pick a theme, magical, mystical, really out there, even hard to achieve theme for my garden, just something to aim for, because vegetable gardens and decorative gardens can be one and the same, and they are one and the same. And polyculture, mixing lots of different species of plants together in your garden, is a really healthy, sustainable way to garden, because it helps you completely cut out man-made chemical fertilizers, pesticides, any inorganic or unnatural processes or treatments that you may have to go through to keep an unnatural garden alive. Polyculture, many different varieties together, while keeping in mind a lot of the knowledge and science of companion planting, how plants affect each other chemically, also how they affect each other being different sizes and shapes above and below ground, combining all that knowledge together. So I always aim for a beautiful garden, and every year my vision grows and grows closer and closer to completion, till finally people are complimenting me on my beautiful gardens. So don't be put off by any failures, because you're dealing with an individual and unique situation, your soil, your location, your weather condition, whatever that year has to throw at you. There are so many variables, and every year you're going to have to make do and combine all the different knowledge that you can find, that you know, with what you're learning in the moment in your own garden, to create your own unique recipe for a sustainable, organic, new earth garden. Don't let seemingly failing at techniques, or why I'm saying this is because I've seen some learned, educated people feeling like they've failed a little bit because they haven't pulled off some specific manual-like ways about doing things, but they're only examples, and you'll have to mix it all together to do the best you can with your specific conditions. That's why I'm reiterating that so much, because so many people are getting into gardening right now and are testing and trying so many different little tricks and tips and ways about doing things. And things may or may not work, and you just move on and try something else. Use what you've learnt to adjust how you move forward, and if at a total loss, do what I do. Investigate how that plant grows naturally in nature. What are its requirements? What are its natural companions? What does it like? What doesn't it like? And then find a spot or create a spot in your own environment that mimics that natural eco-cycle, and plant your plant within that natural system. Let Mother Earth show us the way, because that is actually the manual to life, and you'll find these lessons and these ways of doing things can reflect back in your own life and teach you how to, by using the natural system of the universe that created us and sustains all life, to model the way we do things, because this system works in symbiotic harmony with all life around it, giving and taking at the same time, while building more and more diverse, abundant conditions for more diverse and abundant life. Sorry for my use of words. Using the earth and the universe as an example, we can see how to adjust our own lives in perfect harmony with the greatest force, and realign ourselves back into alignment with ourselves as guardians of the earth, able to protect and enrich every life-giving aspect of this earth, guarding the earth, gardening the earth, regenerating the earth. And maybe some new seeds you've planted haven't grown as well as you thought they would. Well, they may be adjusting, they may be learning, they may be activating different strengths and aspects in their DNA for next season. So now is really, well, for me anyway, a time to reconsider, plan how I'm going to do things next year, prepare to make next year even easier for myself, because unless I'm expanding a sustainable, permanent culture, a permaculture system should be getting easier and easier every year, at least after the third year, unless you're expanding on what you've already got. It's really an art form, and that vision you hold at the start, you're learning how, through different technique and over time, also patience, putting different cycles and systems and things into practice and seeing the results, and finally combining all of those tools and techniques together to pull off that end vision in your mind. So visualize your dream garden, and it's just like another form of painting or recording layer upon layer of music to create a song. You're using all these different tools, all these plants, these different instruments, these different colors, different heights, different shapes, different sizes, even dealing with different chemicals, different life forms, bugs, underlife, underground life, birds, animals, all to create that end vision picture year after year, taking things away, adding things in, expanding on what's working and cutting back on what obviously isn't. It's the art of gardening. The advice I got given on pruning a bonsai, have the vision in your mind and cut away anything that isn't a part of that vision. And this time of year, late spring, early summer, when we have so much delicious stone fruit, peaches, plums, nectarines, and apricots, I plant them straight into tubs, and they store really well over the winter and sprout up on their own in early spring, and that's when I separate them all. So like any stone fruit, and also a lot of trees which have stone fruit like seeds, they're quite hard to store. Well, I've had trouble storing them, but I've had great success straight after I eat the fruit. I'll give this to my chickens. Straight after I eat the fruit, I plant it straight into the earth, and as I eat my fruit, as I go through my batches of fruit, I save the seeds in water so they don't dry out, because sometimes that can affect the seed. So at the end of the week, I end up with a nice little handful of seeds. There's apricots and plums here, and I plant them in tubs like this on their side so that no bacteria or any nasties build up on their surface. When they're on their side, the water runs down smooth, everything else runs down smooth. I've already planted some nuts in here, as you can see. So any stone-like fruit, I plant directly into the soil after eating, at least within the week that I've eaten it. Plant them all on their side, like that. And last year I really concentrated on doing this with peaches and nectarines, and was really successful, but not so successful with the apricots and plums. They were a little bit more finicky, and I didn't eat as many, so I didn't have as many to play with. So this year I'm really putting the apricots and plums together, and I'll be more gentle with them and then add them to my collection. Now, all the ones I did last year, I planted straight into the soil, and look at all these peach and nectarine trees. They're all so happy. I've hardly had to do anything besides separate them and pot them on. We've had a lot of rain, so I've taken them out of these styrofoam tubs. I usually just leave them in the tubs, and the natural rain is more than enough. And some plum trees did survive, and apricots are in the mix, but it's predominantly peach and nectarines. So these are just the seeds, the pips, the stones that you would throw away. I plant them directly into my plant pots. That's how I started. I would plant them into the sides of my plant pots. But now, because I want to know what I'm planting, I'm grouping them together, such as all these apricots and a few plums in one tub, and I'll label it and separate it and have a lovely batch of apricots, and I can do this over and over again with all the stone fruit I eat, and every year grow well over enough stone fruit trees, peach trees, nectarine trees, apricot trees, plum trees to feed towns of people. We throw away so much fruit seed, and each tree within 3 to 5 years can produce more than enough fruit for you for a whole season of that variety, of course.